A very good morning to everyone present here. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this conference on adapting environmental laws for effective climate response. I'm Vaibhavi Dwivedi from the 5th year of law school at OP Jindal Global University. And to begin the inaugural session, I would like to welcome all the dignitaries here with a plant. To begin this session, I would like to invite Mr. Ravi Singh to give his welcome address and start the session.
Justice Swatantra Kumar, our guests and honorable colleagues on the dais, eminent people, friends, conservationists, lawmakers, students, all those who are here. It gives me, a great sense of satisfaction to see that, to see this day. This is a day which is dedicated to the, in a way, the conversation, the discussion, thoughts, guidance on environmental law, and something that is so close to the constitutional structure of our country. It's so deeply embedded in the work that is happening in institutional mechanisms, as well as in the way we look at both enactment as well as the execution of such laws. And very importantly, the great interest that we see over the years among students, amongst jurists, and the great, not just the interest, but the action that the justice arm of our country, the judiciary takes in the protection of and the future of the environment in India. I am fortunate, together with many of my colleagues, to be part of an organization that looks at environment, both in the manner in which we are going to discuss today, but also in the practical application of it in the field. Sometimes we see issues relating to climate response, adaptation, sometimes directly as it affects our country and our people. Sometimes on the sidelines, and sometimes in thinking and analyzing internally where we are, where we are going, what is the progression that is taking place. And the latter part, which I call the thoughts in parenthesis, these are the ones that actually lead to a great amount of discussion internally amongst conservationists and lawmakers and those who study and practice law as to what we need to do as a country, given all the challenges that we have and the tremendous spirit that we have to overcome these challenges. From a completely different point of view, I believe, this is the point I'd like to make, that the thousands of actions that India is undertaking in response to the climate and the changing aspect of the climate, in my view, exceed anything that I have seen anywhere else in the world. And this involves individuals, involves discussion, involves the arms of the Constitution. It also involves, to a large extent, the industry, the corporate sector, and the sector of agriculture and others. But it is still not enough, because we as a people, in a lot of ways, we are not satisfied by our achievements. If we achieve a certain thing, then we'd like to better it, and we'd like to go back and criticize that we could have done it better. But seeing the progression of all these through the years, from the start, when we put the principles of protection of the environment into the directive principles of state policy of the Constitution of India, to things like the enactment of the Wildlife Protection Act and the Forest Protection Act and the FRA and all these things, and the case law and the studies and the thinking behind it all, is when we look back at this, maybe 100 years later, these years, this time that we are in, this is going to be, in a way, a watershed of where we are. Now, as I said, we are fortunate in WWF to be able to see this happening, to see some of these things from different sides. And today, to a large extent, to share our views and those of our seniors and elders who will be talking to us today and expressing an understanding in all this. I'm very happy to see many of you who are here and look forward to a productive day, and I hope some of these lessons that we can take forward in the future. We started this initiative as a Green Law lecture. This was started by the Center for Environmental Law in WWF India in 1998, delivered by several eminent jurists and lawyers from India and abroad. And the principle was to contribute to the promotion of environmental law, its literacy, as well as the progressive development of environmental law in India. We have focused on contemporary legal issues, environmental protection, and natural resource conservation. In the past, lectures have been delivered by Dr. L.M. Singhvi, Shri Kuru Kulasurya, Justice Venkatachala, Justice Ashok Desai, Justice Kuldeep Singh, Justice J.S. Verma, Justice Sabharwal, Justice Madan Lokur, and several others in shorter form. We started a diploma in environmental law some time back, I think in 1995, 96. And in 2006 and 2007, we realized that we did not have the capacity to do it in-house because the numbers far exceeded our capacity to be able to cater to what was required. And as a result of that, we undertook a series of steps to join hands with leading institutions, legal and law institutions in India, and to take this forward. Now, the partnership that we have with the OP Jindal Global University is one of them, and you'll be hearing more about it through the day. Thank you. I welcome all of you again, and look forward to interacting you not just today, but also in the days and the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I will now invite Professor C. Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal Global University, for his welcome address.
A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of the WWF as well as OP Jindal Global University, and in particular on behalf of Mr. Ravi Singh, Dr. Sejal Vora, Ms. Molika Arabi, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all distinguished guests, faculty members of our university, but also other universities and institutions in and around NCR, students, and of course our distinguished guests of honor who are present here, starting with Honorable Mr. Justice Swatantra Kumar, former chairperson of the National Green Tribunal and former judge of Supreme Court of India, Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson, Honorable Mr. Justice Sabrina McKenna. Today is a very special occasion for us at Jindal Global University for a number of reasons, but most importantly, the theme of this conference. The conference could not have organized at a more critical time on adapting environmental laws for effective climate response. I would like to keep it short as we are looking forward to hearing from our distinguished guests. This theme of this conference is so important for the future of humankind. In many ways, we are indeed facing an existential threat, and this threat requires a collective response of humanity. And law as an institution, as a social institution, has always risen up to the occasion. In the past, through law, we have sought social change and social engineering. We have been able to adapt and to respond through law a number of initiatives both within the society but also beyond. So the hope is that understanding the need for addressing issues surrounding climate through law is a very important way by which we can build capacities to respond to a huge crisis that is impending. It's also a very a unique initiative from the standpoint of both OP Jindal Global University and WWF India. Of course, as Mr. Ravi Singh mentioned, WWF has been playing a very leadership role in these issues, including many years ago setting up the Center for Environmental Law, and generations of students as well as faculty members having caught their imagination and have worked and be part of this center. But this is the first time in many ways for a university to be partnering in a substantive manner to offer a degree program, which will be launched later in the evening, but also an intellectually engaging conference which has brought together a number of experts across different fields. The nature of climate change is the problem requires a response from multiple disciplines, and that's exactly what has happened in organizing this conference itself. So I'm grateful to WWF in particular, and also Molika for taking leadership within WWF in organizing and planning this conference. I also want to take a moment to really thank three individuals, Justice Swatendra Kumar, Justice Michael Wilson, and Justice Sabrina McKenna. Justice Swatendra Kumar has been a great source of inspiration for me personally. He has long before many institutions in India recognize our potential. Justice Sunita Kumar came to our campus and delivered a very inspiring lecture, and that lecture actually was one of the early collaborations between Hawaii and India, between Jindal and the Supreme Court of Hawaii, as well as Michael Wilson's visit to India. And on that occasion, both Justice Sunita Kumar and Justice Wilson addressed our students and faculty. Since then, we've ended up building a very substantive collaboration with the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and I'm grateful to both Justice Michael Wilson and Justice Sabrina McKenna, both of whom have been visiting India very frequently. As some of you know, we have a substantive partnership with the Supreme Court of Hawaii in which every year 5 of our students pursue a summer judicial clerkship at the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and that has become a very popular program. Some of the students who have been part of that program have become, let's say, active student leaders in advancing the cause of issues surrounding having a more responsible approach towards addressing climate change. I want to also thank in particular Mr. Ravi Singh for his gracefulness and his generosity in having this partnership built between us. And it's also very special. At the cost of embarrassing him, I will say that we are also celebrating his birthday today. So many happy returns of the day, Mr. Ravi Singh. He's of course so beautifully planned to celebrate birthday through a conference, and what an amazing way to do that. So I mentioned this because, when dealing with issues surrounding climate change, the most important word is collaboration. Collaboration across institutions, across disciplinary aspects is so critical. And I think it is only fair to say that WWF has always provided leadership in building partnerships across non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, think tanks, research institutions, civil society, as well as academic institutions. And that's the culmination of that effort is what we are seeing today in the form of this conference. Lastly, I will say is that while it is easy for us to be, let's say, less hopeful about the challenge, about our ability to address this challenge, it is important for us to rise to the occasion. The problem that is before us is very significant, and I think time is also running out, and we need to provide leadership in building and galvanizing intellectual and social consciousness surrounding the issue of climate change. And I very strongly believe that this could be done only by partnership of the kind that we're talking about, and to be engaged in nuanced conversations surrounding the problem and also our efforts to address the problem. The young people who are in this room, and particularly the law students, but also others who are interested in addressing this issue, there is no better issue, there's no more important issue than this, that they can dedicate good part of their years towards addressing. So once again, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. I now call upon Dr. Sejal Vora, Program Director, WWF India, for her introductory remarks.
Justice Sunita Kumar, dignitaries on the dais, colleagues, friends, guests, good morning. What I have been asked to do this morning is to set the context of why we are here. I am no climate expert, but I believe that everybody in this room and beyond needs to really understand the implications of what we're up against, whether you're a climate expert or not. So I speak to you not as an expert. There's going to be lots of them in this room, and you're going to hear lots of expert talks, certainly not from me. But what I want to just remind ourselves of is, first of all, that the climate science is unequivocal. We know what is happening to the climate today. We know that in the last 30 years, average global temperatures have increased by up to 0.6%, and it is predicted that by 2100, this is likely to be increased by an additional 4 degrees centigrade or more. The impacts of this will be phenomenal. I think it's hard to imagine sitting here in an air-conditioned room what 4 degrees centigrade increase in climate change means to people who do not have these luxuries. By 2100, it's also predicted that rainfall in some areas may go up or down by 30%. This is enormous in terms of the impacts it will have on food security and other issues. So what will be the impacts on humans? And certainly from a WWF point of view, what will be the impact on biodiversity? Because that's also important. Now, the scale of the impacts will obviously depend on our ability to cope and adapt. And similarly for biodiversity, the scale of the impact depends on the ability of biodiversity to cope and adapt. So what can non-humans do when climate temperatures rise? They can move, they can adapt, they can acclimatize, or they can die. And essentially this is what will happen to a lot of wildlife and biodiversity as the climate changes. What organizations like WWF and others, and the legal framework also that governments set together, is to see how can we actually develop systems, procedures, and laws that will help with coping, adaptation, and acclimatization so that we don't lose a lot of the species on this planet. Some of the studies that have been done by various organizations show that with a 2-degree rise in temperature, up to 25% of species can go locally extinct in an area. So that is enormous when we start thinking about extinctions across the globe. What happens to people? And that's even more alarming and even more scary. I think the most recent IPCC report was really, in a way, a clarion call for action, because some of the facts and figures in there were extremely frightening. A 1.5 degree centigrade rise will have devastating impacts, especially on the vulnerable and the poor. India, of course, is projected to be one of the countries worst hit by increases in climate change, partly because of the sheer numbers of poor and vulnerable people that we have in this country. We will see sea level rise affecting, they say, up to 50 million people in India. We will see heat waves of the kind that we have been seeing in the recent years. And the projection is that one of the worst hit countries in the world is going to be Kolkata, which is, of course, in India. Rainfall patterns and floods will increase. We've seen devastating floods happening, say, once in 10 years. The frequency of those floods is likely to increase to almost annually. This obviously also has a huge cost implication. The impacts on GDP in India are supposed to be enormous, and figures vary, but up to 5% GDP can be affected by climate change in India. So how does a developing economy like India deal with something like climate change? It's a huge challenge. On the one hand, we have a development imperative. As a country, we need to develop, we need to lift millions of people out of poverty. At the same time, we are faced with this global phenomenon of climate change, which will impact us and the rest of the world. Obviously, mitigation and adaptation is something that has to be built into our development trajectory. The question then arises, who will bear the cost? And what will it cost? We have said up to $1 trillion is the cost of dealing and coping with climate change. The debates and discussions in the world that are going on today are all centered about who pays for this, who's responsible, who pays, who bears the cost. I think while those debates and discussions are going on and countries are jostling in terms of where the funding for this will come from, India has an imperative to embark on a different development trajectory. We have to change the way we develop. We have to adapt the way we are going forward, because otherwise it's really going to be disastrous, not just for India, but for the world. We need to think about the way we generate electricity and see how we can change that. We need to change the way we move. mobility, transport, we have to think very carefully about what the future of transport in this country is going to be like. We have to think about the way we grow food. We have to think about the way we use water. And we also have to think about the way we consume in the future. The impacts of climate change may not be felt by me. I'm now old. But they will be felt by future generations. And in a way, it was quite exciting and heartening to see civil society and school students rising up against climate change. This was something that I think woke the world up to say the impacts are going to be felt by children. And children are now rising up to demand change. They're demanding change from their politicians, they're demanding change from their governments. And civil society pressure will certainly, in many countries, hopefully, change that trajectory. The legal system also plays a role. And I think this is what we're here to discuss, is how do we hold our policymakers and decision makers and politicians accountable? Because they also have made certain promises. Today's headline in the Hindustan Times, for those of you who read it, basically said that we are slipping backwards, that countries that have made commitments are not meeting those commitments, that there is a slide back. And my question is, who is going to hold governments accountable for that? It can be civil society and it can be the legal system. And I think this is what we're here to discuss today. And I really look forward to the deliberations and the thoughts from the many experts who are here today. So thank you very much. And let's have a really good, interesting day. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Vora, for providing us with a base for this conference. I now invite Ms. Monica Arabhi, Advisor, Center for Environmental Law, WWF India, for her introductory remarks.
Thank you, Vaibhavi. A very good morning to everyone, and a warm welcome to the one-day conference on adapting environmental laws. Adapting environmental laws for effective climate response. As said by Dr. Sejal Vora, it's the context and the climate change aspects are pretty serious. And the reason why we thought about this conference is also about this whole issue of how climate change is the greatest threat to social justice, human rights, and progress around the world. Today's conference basically is going to explore the existing challenges and legal and policy solutions to the crisis, placing, of course, climate justice at the center of the discussions, which we will have over the sessions right after the inaugural session. The conference will include technical sessions on climate change and biodiversity. We'll have an exclusive session around legal and policy measures to promote energy efficiency and renewables, and strengthening adaptation and resilience to climate change. This conference is going to engage conservationists, scientists, legal and environmental practitioners, and environmental justice leaders. Some of them are on the dais, some will be joining us during the course of the day. There are no two ways on the fact that law and policies currently dealing with climate change are both complex and ambiguous. To address the impacts of every changing climate, we need effective and stringent laws to balance out the adverse effects of climate change and combat life-threatening conditions. Legal efforts basically to address climate change started at the international level with the 1992 United Nations Convention on Climate Change. We famously know it as UNFCCC, but have struggled to take root nationally at policy and execution level. The official Indian position in the international climate negotiations and domestic debates is expressed in troubling binaries. There is always two ways about it: economic development versus climate change mitigation, centralized command and control, environmental governance regimes versus decentralized adaptive governance mechanisms. Then there is ever famous talking, and we speak about energy and renewables. So transitioning to renewable energy versus carbon sequestration through forest and so on. At present, India has not formulated any law for the purpose of giving effects to goals of the Paris Agreement. The National Action Plan on Climate Change, which we all refer to time and again, mainly for law students and all those who are working on the legal and the policy aspects of climate change, was released by Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change in 2008. is the Indian government's official recognition of climate change concerns and the need to appropriately respond and adapt to climate change. Other than this, we are yet to see any more legislations coming to the light. Many countries' domestic climate policies urgently, definitely need a coherent vision for taking and tackling climate change that should be clearly reflected in framing of legislations and policy documents, addressing multiple sectors and aligned with multiple federal levels, and in the design of appropriate institutional frameworks to achieve climate policy objectives of mitigation and adaptation in a holistic and a non-fragmented way. Climate change, of course, has been discussed in many forums. We keep seeing a lot of conferences happening on this issue time and again by many institutions, and which is very good, and also sometimes gives us enough material to take the challenges forward. Today exactly we're going to do the same. Climate change is mainly to learn its impacts and resilience to this change. WWF India and OP Jindal Global University hope that by end of today's conference, the participants will emerge more confident to deal with the legal and technical issues collateral with environmental and climate change, are equipped to discuss effective response to climate change and how environmental law and policies do play a crucial role in deciphering or understanding the subject of climate change and other issues attached to climate change like energy access, climate adaptation, climate-induced conflict, and a lot of other issues. We welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arabi, for highlighting the need for specific climate change legislations and policies. I now invite Honorable Mr. Justice Michael D. Wilson, Judge, Supreme Court of Hawaii, USA, for his keynote address.
Aloha. Well, I can tell those of you that may have been to Hawaii, when you hear that word, you smile. And anyways, even if you haven't been there, I know it makes people smile because it has that meaning, much like namaste, that recognizes the beauty in every human being. But I will confess to being overly enthusiastic today because I feel that I'm in the presence of human beings that are part of the final stand. Or to put it another way, as a judge, you have the opportunity to see the law working in a manner in which it was meant to work, and sometimes a manner in which it was devised and hasn't yet started to work. So let's talk today as though we are kindred spirits, if you will, with the understanding that it's with the perspective of what's taking place internationally with judges. And I would ask you to give some consideration to what has evolved now in the judicial landscape in terms of institution building, because the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment has been created. It has been created with the understanding that the most important issue facing judges is climate change. And in the course of the conferences that are taking place now throughout our international legal community, there's more and more of a focus on the idea that we have to separate the notion of aspirational, that is what the law can achieve, and authentic, what it is achieving. So today is an extremely exciting moment for me, in large part because of the people that are in this room that have equipped myself and many other judges throughout the world on this important issue. I have to give my warm regards to Justice Swatantra Kumar, who was a personal inspiration to me and other judges in Hawaii, helped us develop our environmental court. And Secretary General Singh, some years ago, I was fortunate enough to be in his presence and be mesmerized by the work that the World Wildlife Foundation of India is performing, and that's why I wear this pin, one of your great woodpeckers, in recognition of a forest worker that was wounded because he was trying to protect the tiger's habitat. I, as well, am in the presence of my brother, Justice, or I call him Justice, but he's actually the Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University, Vice Chancellor Rajkumar, who is an avatar of justice, as you may know, and has helped bring this collaboration together today. And I thought it was quite entertaining that Sajil Vora said she was not an expert. I was just with her in her forest that she has restored that has bears and it has leopards, and I don't know many people that have had the expertise to do that, as well as be in charge of the programs at the World Wildlife Foundation. And finally, Malika, thank you very much. When I think about the tiger, which is my favorite animal, I think about Malika, and I think about many of the people in this room. So let me move forward now to talk about, again, this idea that's very important to judges, which is the reality of what's happening with the law and climate change. I know I'm speaking to the converted, but with that said, let me say that I'm attempting to move forward on my slide here, but this often happens. Can we see what we can do to get our pictures? Okay, thank you. This often happens. God has decided at various times that technology is to fail me, but that's okay. We'll just move forward, because what I am focused on today is the concept of the final stand. And I say this in the presence of one of your great litigators, Rahul Chaudhary, who is here in the front row, who has been part of this final stand. I say this also in the presence of great students from Jindal Global University Law School, who are also present in the room. What does the final stand communicate? Oh, it is. Okay, great. What does the final stand communicate? It communicates where we are now. We have just shared the information base about what's happening with climate change and what an existential threat it is. But the reality, especially if you consider the most remote landmass on Earth, which is Hawaii, the reality is that we are going to see a change that motivates judges, and it motivates young people. And perhaps it will motivate the institutions that are in charge of carbon emissions, that are approximately 90 different institutions, whether you're talking about financial institutions, such as markets, such as energy industries, or you're talking about the individuals with enormous amounts of influence in those communities that are in charge of markets, in charge of making decisions about when our economy is going to move from a brown economy to a green economy. These pictures of Hawaii are indications of some of the treasures that are at issue with climate change and are likely to be lost in the next 30 or 40 years, whether you're talking about beaches or you're talking about the enormously magical animals that we have in Hawaii. The final stand refers to, and from the legal context, this is especially important in terms of considering the solutions available. The final stand communicates that this issue, unlike any other social or legal issue that our world community has faced, has a solution horizon. A solution horizon that is a very profound one. And if you think in terms of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the 2-degree limit that has been set by that group, beyond which the Earth should not heat, it gives you a sense of what is authentic and what's coming. And this individual is the leading atmospheric scientist in England, his name is Lord David King, and he, along with Lawrence Fabius, developed a 2-degree limit at COP21. And his point that he made recently, approximately 1 year ago in China, before a world community that was gathered by the government of China, about 4,000 people, his keynote address made the point that on present trajectories of carbon emissions, within 40 or 50 years, Bangladesh would have to be evacuated. And Sajal referred to the destabilizing effect of that, but from a legal point of view, we are now facing the issue that, according to, this is Antonio Benjamin, perhaps the most prominent justice in the world on the issue of environmental law, although maybe we could say Justice Swatantra Kumar is his equivalent, but in any case, his point is this is the most important issue facing judges globally. My goodness, the judges are facing climate change. And this cartoon, which is getting a tremendous amount of attention in judicial conferences, indicates two judges that are thinking to themselves, what position should we take on climate change from a legal point of view? Should we pretend that we don't have a problem, or do we have to imagine what the consequences are of an existential threat? Lorenzo's question then is, what can we do? This was a question that a law student at the University of Hawaii asked at a colloquium of environmental law professors that gathered from around the world, and there was silence in the room. There had been a lot of discussion among the professors about what is happening and the consequences of climate change, but the idea of coming up with a plan was something that had escaped them. But it didn't escape Lorenzo, who was a young student from Brazil that came to the University of Hawaii Law School, because he has a sense of, and we share this, probably many of us in the room, climate change anxiety. It's on your mind. You see what's coming. Lorenzo said, what can I do, to the professors that he depended upon, and they weren't quite sure. So there's been a lot of work since then. Well, it was also a message to Lorenzo and the younger generation that it's necessary now for action to be taken by the younger generation, because this collection of interests, if you will, the 90 interests that are in large part in control of carbon emissions, has not yet moved from a brown to a green economy. And that, therefore, you could argue the executive branch and the legislative branches have not been successful in creating the policies and moving forward the importance of meeting this 2-degree limit in terms of the heating of the earth. A small group, a small body of determined spirits fired by unquenchable faith. This is an interesting chapter in an ongoing question about whether we're going to be able to protect the earth that deals with the law, because students, and to some extent law professors, but students have now been galvanized by the action of the executive branch, the legislative branches, the actions that have perpetrated the continued emissions of carbon in a way that means that future generations are going to be threatened. And in the United States, the litigation has been brought that's focused on this issue recently, and it's still an ongoing litigation, recently got the attention of the United States Supreme Court because future generations stood up for themselves, filed a lawsuit, much like a lawsuit that's been filed in Europe that you've probably heard about called the Urgenda case, in which Netherlands did recognize that future generations have a right to protect themselves from a government that fails to comply with its obligations to reduce the amount of carbon in the air, or greenhouse emissions. Well, in the United States, now that this case has taken place, and a very brave judge named Ann Aiken wrote a magnificent decision stating that, and this gives me a certain amount of emotion to state this, and I get to state it quite often, but if you will digest this concept that a federal judge, when the judge makes a decision, is making a decision that can affect the entire country, and it also can prevent the actions of the President of the United States. She decided that every citizen in the United States under our federal Constitution has a constitutional right to a stable climate capable of supporting human life, and therefore allowed a case to move forward suing the Environmental Protection Agency. The Supreme Court, in an unprecedented action, granted the government's request to stay that case. And so students demonstrated, students appeared, law professors appeared, and it created, I think, an enormous amount of awareness on the part of the younger generation as to how they can use the rule of law and what the significance is, particularly in the country that has the largest carbon footprint. The significance is if they prevail in this lawsuit, they'll be able to use the rule of law to be able to start requiring government to to achieve carbon neutrality. Well, when you consider what's at stake with the Juliana case, and you consider what's at stake in the cases that no doubt are going to be populating the courts of India, consider that the rule of law may only be available for another 40 or 50 years. And this is the Supreme Court of New South Wales, this is an article written by one of the justices that made the point that in 40 or 50 years, given the destabilization that's likely to take place if we continue with the same level of carbon emissions, we may not be able to have a rule of law because of the change in the political systems more towards an autocratic system based on power rather than the rule of law. So, to conclude, the final stand. Final stand has a very powerful and simple, straightforward proposition that the rule of law, with the movement of younger generations, can solve this problem. And I call upon all of you to give some thought about how to be part of this final stand. But I met with some very noble students that are in this room. Avni and Vaibhavi are right here, and they are students who are part of the idea of putting together legislation that sets a hard cap on carbon, simply states the amount of carbon that's going to be allowed into the air, and therefore requires government to take action. This is not an unfamiliar picture to all of you, but it is a picture that I show throughout the world so that we really are clear about the victim generation. If you are 40 years or younger, this is an existential problem that I think there is no question gives merit to the statement of Antonio Benjamin that the most important issue facing judges is climate change. In the United States, we have leadership, as you know, that has become extremely controversial nationwide because of its rather unprincipled position on climate change. And in India, younger generations, I think, understand this. This is a statement by the Minister of Energy, Coal and Mining about the need to move forward, and also it makes a statement about how the energy policy of the country of India does not include supporting the idea of moving to a green economy, and in fact the budget has been significantly reduced to move to alternative energy. So Earth's law is the term that's used for this concept of passing a hard cap to make sure that there's a message sent to the executive and legislative branches that they have to go carbon neutral within a certain period of time, and the law would designate those intervals. When I conclude with the word aloha, let me also recognize a remarkable source of inspiration I've just recently had a chance to shake the hand of, and that's Dr. Samir Singh Ha, who I think of as Dr. Tiger. The tiger is the most important animal in terms of my experience, and it's my favorite animal. And it's an animal that represents the consequences of climate change without any question in terms of the deforestation that's going to take place. But it also, from a cultural point of view, represents hope. India has tigers, in large part, because of its tradition of respect for the natural world. India has an enormous amount of, if you will, environmental challenge. But nonetheless, the tiger's been able to survive. And with the kind of leadership that the World Wildlife Foundation of India provides, with the kind of collaboration that is taking place now in India around issues, whether it's the Earth Stand or whether it has to do with the Green Tribunal, that for many years was the most powerful environmental court, India is really the key to the future of what's going to take place with respect to climate change. You have one of the top 3 carbon footprints, but you have a group of citizens that are the youngest on Earth, and therefore have, perhaps you could say, the most investment in the future on this issue. And then finally, you have the enormous amount of talent that comes apart from the legal community. So I salute all of you for the work that you're doing, and I thank you for the inspiration you provided my life, and I continue to commit to this idea of a final stand and working with India to be able to become carbon neutral. The LLM program that is being developed and is now becoming official, a LLM program devoted to climate change, energy, and the environment, is an example of how the rule of law can be formally accelerated, supercharged, in order to be able to protect the environment. So it is a great honor to be here in the presence of this innovative program put together by the World Wildlife Foundation of India and Jindal Global University. I thank you all very much for the honor to be here, and I look forward to a conference that I know will provide, hopefully, some extra strength for this idea of the final stand. Aloha.
Thank you, Justice Wilson, for introducing the final stand. We look forward to discussing it further in the next session. I now invite Honorable Ms. Justice Sabrina McKenna, Judge, Supreme Court of Hawaii, for the presidential address.
And aloha and namaste. I'm really excited to be here on this conference, and as Dr. Sejawaru has said, I am also not an expert, but I agree with Justice Wilson. She is actually an expert. I truly am not an expert, but I am somewhat of, I have been immersed in the law for many years now, and I have been a judge in the state of Hawaii for over 25 years, and I have been a justice for the last 8 years of the Hawaii Supreme Court. In terms of adapting environmental laws for effective climate response, of course, there's three ways in which laws can be made or enforced. First is by the executive, second, the legislative, and third, by the judicial branches. In terms of the executive branches, of course, in the United States, there could be executive orders. I don't see that happening under our current administration. But also, it is the executive branch that enters into treaties, multinational treaties. Of course, our prior president did engage the United States in the Paris Agreement, and unfortunately, this administration has dropped out. However, it really strikes me when we were in Mumbai speaking to law students, and they asked a legitimate question: how can you Americans come to India and ask us to take these steps when you dropped out of the Paris Agreement? And I say, I understand that sentiment, but please remember that this president did not receive the majority of the votes in the United States, and that the majority, I think that there is a sentiment amongst many citizens in the United States that what the actions being taken at the national level, federal level, are wrong. And actually, laws, there are many cities and states at the local level that are taking action despite what the federal government is doing. In fact, Hawaii is one of many states that have actually passed legislation saying we are going to adopt the principles of the Paris Agreement within our own state. So Hawaii has adopted the Paris Agreement as a matter of state law, and other states have done that also. And it is at the local level. For example, it was counties, cities that started passing legislation banning plastic, just like when we went to Mumbai this weekend. The plastic ban had gone into effect, and I was really delighted to be able to sip out of steel straws. So we can act. And the second level is the legislative, even if the executive doesn't act. But I still think that these multinational treaties are important because the laws have to have all fronts pushing forward. But at the local level, at the state level, even at the national level, we can have legislation, the second branch of government. It's really, really important to educate judges, the third branch of government. And I thank my esteemed colleague, Justice Michael Wilson, because he has been the leader in Hawaii and now throughout the world, one of the leaders forming the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment to educate judges on the importance of this issue. And through Justice Wilson and through Vice Chancellor Kumar, I was able to meet and get to know a man I respect so much, Justice Swantantar Kumar, former Justice of the India Supreme Court and head of the Green Tribunal, who had led India in so many important decisions and has helped us form the environmental courts, which Justice Wilson led the efforts in Hawaii for that. So it is really, really important to educate non-expert judges like me, because in recent years, because of the education that we have received through people like Justice Kumar and Justice Wilson, we have made a few important decisions at the Hawaii State Supreme Court. For example, in a case called Maui Electric a couple months ago, we ruled that persons have a property interest enforceable through the courts in a clean and healthy environment, and that the state had to consider the effect of a coal-based power plant on the environment. People could sue for the right to a clean and healthy environment and the air they breathe. In a case called Umberger, we ruled that the state cannot just give out permits to take coral fish from the coral reefs for aquariums throughout the world. You know the pretty fish Finding Nemo? You can't just take those fish without doing an environmental impact statement. These concepts of the precautionary principle have been adopted. We understand that now in Hawaii. And in another case relating to the Kaloko Dam, where an owner of land took measures that caused of major rainfall for the dam to breach and mud and sludge to destroy coral, that we affirmed, although it's difficult to quantify damages, we affirmed a multi-million-dollar damages award based on the polluter pays principle. So it really is important to educate judges. And we have to think globally. We need to act locally in the law, whether it's in the United States or in India. And the citizens can act up. For example, the citizens in Hawaii complained there was activism against a cattle farm on one of our islands, and because of the pollution it is causing, and it is now closing down. So that is the actions that people can take. And the important thing is we can't just speak at conferences like this. I was a member of the plenary keynote panel of 1,000 women business leaders in Hawaii 3 months ago. And the three of us, we said, what is the most important issue facing women today? And we all said, climate change. And we talked about climate change to the 1,000 women business leaders in the state of Hawaii. And that is what we all have to do. We don't have to be experts. We have to talk about it and spread the word, just as Justice Wilson has been doing throughout Hawaii. We need to have these uncomfortable discussions. It's terrifying when we think of it. When you see that slide that Justice Wilson showed about schools being closed down, well, let me tell you, I grew up in Japan. And I'm telling you, when I was a child 50 years ago, schools were closing in Tokyo, where I was attending school, because the air was so dirty. The air was so dirty in Tokyo. The rivers in Tokyo were so polluted, and they stunk so much. And people were getting disease like Kawasaki disease and Minamata disease from the water pollution. Have you been to Japan recently? It is a clean country. So what I'm trying to tell you is that this can be done. When people act up, it was the citizens that acted up and said, we can't take this anymore. And there was environmental litigation, and that's why Japan cleaned up. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not doomsday, but if we all act together, this can be done, and the laws can be responsive to the needs of climate change. Educate everyone, especially your judges. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice McKenna, for highlighting the role of judiciary in combating climate change. I now call upon Honorable Mr. Justice Swatantra Kumar, former chairperson NGT and former judge, Supreme Court of India, for the inaugural address.
Good morning to all of you. My esteemed colleagues, Michael and Sabina, it's great to be with you on this dais this morning. Mr. Ravi Singh, Secretary General, WWF, Professor Rajkumar, Dr. Vora, Malika, and Professor Patnaik. Distinguished delegates, special invitees, and more particularly, the students of the Global Jindal University. Firstly, I must compliment both the co-sponsors of this conference. WWF has certainly worked beyond its name for the environment. And Jindal University has achieved its new dimensions with Mr. Rajkumar being there, who doesn't take more than 5 minutes to establish that he's running one of the best institutions in this part of the country. I'm very happy to be here this morning, but it's very kind of Mr. Singh and everybody here to give me this beautiful plant. My problem is, can I assure this plant will survive for a week? Speaking for myself, no. Do you want to imagine Delhi have a good air? Delhi has clean water. Delhi has clean rivers. Delhi has no traffic mess. Delhi throws no emissions. And most importantly, the little children going to the schools do not have to wear masks. They are not to be prohibited from going to the playgrounds to play. Doesn't this all sound to you to be so very imaginative and far from reality? Then, ladies and gentlemen, one of the best known principles, of course incorporated in law today across the world, but Gandhiji said it years and years back, that you give earth to your next generation, if not in better, but in the condition you received. Can anybody sitting here, including the great members of the Hawaii, can say that they're handing over this earth to their children in a better state of mind and a better state of health? I don't think it will take any of you 1 second to say no. Why so much of negativity? We can't answer anything in the positive. Is that what is the life, human life about? Is that what is not? When we talk of intergenerational equity principle that we are talking about, it has been incorporated by judicial pronouncements, but at the same time, we need to work out in a way that we do protect our environment. Two things I would certainly share, even at the cost of repetition, if anybody had heard me earlier, because I find it very difficult not to say these two things to the people with whom I share my thoughts. First is, I hope all of you know that our framers of the Constitution provided a golden triangle for environment in our Constitution, which I say with some sense of responsibility that no constitution in the world provides. You just heard Justice Abina saying that the Hawaii Court and the Supreme Court in US had introduced this concept of providing a stable environment. In our Constitution, we have directive principles which places an obligation upon the state government and all public bodies and authorities to protect environment, to protect natural resources, to protect climate, to protect wildlife, and to protect human life. Then we have the constitutional duties on the citizens. Our Constitution provides that every citizen of our country shall endure its best to do all these things which the state is required to do. Then comes the induction of and expansion of Article 21 of the Constitution of India, where the Supreme Court expanded the principle to say that right to life includes right to clean and decent environment. This is what I call as the golden triangle for environment in our Constitution. In terms of heritage, we are very rich in environmental protection, but we don't care for our heritage. The second thing which I often say, don't make environment, climate change sound so technical, so scientific, so difficult to understand. I think that is the first error we all are committing, whether it is legislature, whether it is executive, or it is judicially. See, this is a matter of common knowledge, common sense for a common man. Who doesn't need clean air to breathe, water to drink, and to protect your life against pollution? So it should be always projected. And rightly so, I think, that when we were saying that Dr. Vora, whether she should be or she should not be an expert, to me she sounded more than an expert. So I think Mr. Singh sounded to me to be a great expert. But the question is what they communicate to the people at large. Do you communicate that it's a matter, a subject of common understanding and common behavior? One of the most relevant consideration, the concept I would mention, would be the concept of time. Time has preceded us. Time will follow us. Time is abstract. Time is instinctive. Time is money. Time is omnipresent. Time is life. And time is short. Therefore, in this short period, what are we to do? Then, as an analogy, environment is similar to time, but while it precedes us, it might not follow us. This is because, unlike time, it is tangible and distinguishable, and therefore waste of environment, depletion of environment, disruption of environment ecosystems is not just visible, but can be felt. Truly so. Now, let's talk of law. As I told you that all our environmental laws, particularly air, water, Environmental Protection Act, noise, biodiversity, everything has been enacted by our parliament in furtherance to its international commitments, that is either under the treaties or the conventions where they were a party. They decided to enact laws. Justice Veena said that there should be awareness and sensitization of judges. I think there should be sensitization of everybody, whether he is a legislature, whether he is an executive member, whether he is a judge, he is a lawyer, he is a school teacher, professor, anybody. Because this is a subject which everybody must understand. It's very sad today that, these great advocates sitting here, they start classifying judges. He is a pro-environment judge, he is not a pro-environment judge. How can there be a judge without being environmentally conscious? I don't see that. No judge is born with the third or the sixth sense of environment in his brain. He is a person who is to do justice, and environmental justice is the most sensitive subject today across the world. It's only the degree that differs. You've heard the judges from Hawaii. You've heard other people giving you the problem. The problem is common. The problem is the implementations of law. I think that we have enough laws in place. What matters and which is we are falling short on is the implementation of those laws and respect for those laws. If you examine the environmental laws of India in spirit of the constitutional intent of the framers, then you have no doubt that we have more than enough laws to protect our environment, natural resources, and consequently the climate and the climate change. But if we do not fulfill our basic obligations, then there is no question that we can ever, no matter how many laws you enact further, that you will be able to protect the environment and handle the climate change issues today. When we talk of climate change, what are you looking at? You look at, you're destroying your glaciers. In India, forget about it, right from Atlantic down to Himalayas, the glaciers are reducing at 1 meter per year. In a place like Manali, you have lost 7 meters of glacier already. Forests, you're wiping out forest across. You go to Brazil, just now when Justice Michael referred to our great friend Benjamin, he has authored one of the recent judgments where the whole forest of most material forest area of Brazil was on stake. Supreme Court of India, the NGT or other institutions, high courts, have passed very strict orders for protection of forests. But destruction of forest is our habit. We feel very proud that, look, I have wiped out a hill of 500 trees and I have created a 7-story hotel there. So that's our sense of development. Now, when we talk of development, ladies and gentlemen, the National Green Tribunal Act is the only act in the world which provides for all the 3 known principles of environmental jurisprudence as a statutory condition for adjudication of environmental disputes. If you talk of polluter pays principle, you talk of sustainable development, and you talk of precautionary principle. Section 20 says you will decide cases only with reference to these 3 principles. See the wisdom of the people who framed it. But it is the implementing agencies for whom these principles are more to be kept in a locker rather than on the field. And they make it sure that it remains in the locker. So what I would say is that we are contributing. We are wiping out forests, reducing glaciers, indiscriminate dumping of waste, release of pollutant emissions, ship sinking from the rest of the part of the world. In the Asian developing countries, the ships are brought and left because breaking of a ship costs you more than practically buying a new ship. So you find the sea waters very easy of this part and just leave them there. Then you have today, you have tsunamis coming up, you have great, Uttarakhand, whether you talk of Simla, you talk of any part of, then you have now the sea level altering to the extent that Bangladesh 3/4 may be in water if there was sea level changes as projected. You have just now you heard that the temperature variation is going to be finishing the wildlife. So these are not small issues, but who is contributing? Is it somebody else who is coming and contributing? We always believe that somebody else is going to do the good. My job is to create a problem. So I would create a problem and you solve it. And you will think the next person will solve it. So it's a circle which is preventing initiative and social consciousness for protecting our environment. A very small thing, If you do not know, do you know that the Delhi, which was generating the waste only, which was around about 400 to 600 metric tons per day in late 19s, today is generating more than 1,700 metric tons of waste per day. Where are you going to handle it? If you're going to handle it, you have to have a proper mechanism right from collection, segregation, treatment, and when we talk of as that you can convert the waste into wealth, linguistically sounds very attractive. But when we talk of implementation, it does not. Our collection is, even today, round about 40% of the waste collected is left on the roads or at the points of collection. They have no sources. Now, if you are going to handle that, what are we talking about climate change? See, climate change is not some great event happening in the sky. Climate change is a direct consequence of human activities on the earth. This planet where we are living is our ancestral used to worship earth. If I don't know how many of you know that no puja in India starts without worshipping the earth first on which you are sitting. That was our standard of environmental consciousness. And today, all we do is where we can make, I just would give you one small example of the case, which of course these few lawyers sitting here would know, the Shimla case that we had in the Tara Devi. The gentleman wiped out 600 trees grown up for 50 to 100 years just to make a hotel. He wiped out the entire hill. Now, if that is your environmental consciousness, then don't talk about climate change. Please kindly think of Bangalore. Bangalore was stated to be an air-conditioned city of India. Today, you only have air conditioners there and nothing else. Simla, I was born in that place. If you talked of a fan, you will call mad. And today their hotels have air conditioners. Every house has fan there. Who has done this? Therefore, when we talk of handling the problem of climate change and the role of law into climate change, first principle is sensitization of judges, as was just pointed out. And I would say sensitization and social awareness of all levels. I was invited by the school in Vasant Vihar that I think it is Sri Ram. the toddlers there. So I didn't know whether should I go there or should I not go there. What will I do with the children of 4th and 5th standards? When I went to that school, Michael, you will be very happy to know, they had organized 1-week program for the kids and their parents purely on environment. So when I went there, I spoke to the kids, I spoke to the parents. Then I was interviewed by a class 4 boy. He interviewed me. It gave me so much of happiness. Maybe he was tutored, maybe he was, his professor or teacher was very smart to give him good questions or whatever. But the mere fact that the child could speak about environment and climate change was fantastically happy for me. And I think that is what is called as social awareness. So social awareness, sensitization of all classes, particularly our bureaucracy. That's a very heavy branch of our governance. They think that, anyway, I think better not say anything. So
That said a lot.
see, I forgot that I am in company of such intelligent audience, and I'm getting caught on the wrong foot, because normally I try to avoid saying anything against anybody, and I just say, do your job and let other people do their job. The next thing which I am saying is access to environmental justice. When we talk of access to environmental justice, you must bring accessibility to its true meaning. It should not be a kind of a process, expensive affair for somebody to approach a tribunal court or a high court or a Supreme Court in relation to environment. Because when he's bringing out a case for environment, then he's talking of the community at large. He's not talking of his individuality. If he's complaining of the air pollution, he's talking of everybody living there. So therefore, I think they should be made very easy for them. So providing inexpensive and expeditious environmental justice is fundamental to contribution of justice administration systems to problems of climate change or incidentally for anything. Then if you talk of, we will try now, introduction of environmental impact assessment is fundamental to climate change. You are performing your duties which you have committed, whether you want it at 2 degrees or 3 degrees. I don't know, we all seem to be so obsessed with 2 degrees. So what if it happens to be 4 degrees? Or what happens to be if it is 1 degree? So to me, degree doesn't matter. What matters is that you should be aware that, look, the increase in temperature is going to, in India, we are an agriculture country, and there will be 72% impact on Indian agriculture of the climate change. So you're going to find problems where your fields are giving you 3 crops a year. You may not even find 1. So you have to work it out on that. And everybody has to work. The government, the departments, local authorities, people, the farmers, and most importantly, the lawyers, who normally like to charge and not pay. So, but anyway, I was very happy with the bar in NGT. There were excellent lot of lawyers who even did cases, commissions without charging a single penny. So my compliments to that bar ever. But I would say one thing, that the carbon neutrality, the carbon footprints, these are the matters which are consequential. Now we must find sources, means, and intent to generate alternative sources of power energy. We are fighting a controversy now for the last 10 years whether the coal thermal plant should be shut or not. So if that is our thinking, we are going to lag somewhere. But what we need to do is, yes, we will shut them and we will provide the alternative source of energy. It is not that we can't. We have done it in some states. They have been able to provide. Maybe the hydro project has its own disadvantages, advantages, but certainly not as bad as thermal plants. So these kind of things which we are looking for, and I think I'm nearing to the time which was allotted to me. This is a subject which you can talk, and truly so that when judges talk, very difficult to stop them. But I have, fortunately or unfortunately, ceased to be a judge, and I fall in the category of lawyers and advisors, and more importantly, the member of the society. With these few things, my suggestion is that I'm too glad to inaugurate this great event being held with these two stalwart institutions, which I respect for different reasons, and most importantly, their concern for environment at large and for society at large. Please deliberate upon the core issues. And when you discuss those core issues, don't bring solutions which are more complicated than the problem. Solution must solve the problem. They should not create another problem to be solved by somebody else. So I'm sure with the experts that are following, I went through the program of your conference, and it does talk of very expert people from different fields. So their assistance, your interaction, and I would say one thing, if it is possible to do, is that you must have an interactive sessions. The audience must have a right to ask that expert, and if expert can't satisfy the audience, I think no matter whether it is a point program or oral delivery or lecture or good language used, I think it's a big zero. If that one person sitting goes dissatisfied, that I don't understand what this man has talked about. So we must respect the audience question and satisfy them so that they go back with a good message. I wish this conference a great success, and I'm sure with the people coming like Justice Chandrachud and Justice Gupta, so it's going to be a big event, and with all the experts, there will be a great contribution. And this gives me the most valuable virtue of humankind. It gives me hope that there is still time. There is time to better ourselves as a society. And when we talk of society at the global level, not of a national level at all. There is time to right our wrongs. There is time to make a difference. Time is abstract, but, ladies and gentlemen, time is short. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I now invite Professor Sridhar Patnaik for his concluding remarks.
Good morning, everyone. It's been a fantastic morning as we all gathered here to discuss some of the most pressing challenges that humankind and the society is facing. And it is in that particular context our modest endeavor to sort of contribute to these discussions in a varied manner, both through conversations and constructing knowledge and ideas, and also through that as a particular agency and a medium by means of even having a master's program in law with a focus on environmental law, energy, and climate change. And as we heard from all the speakers, and that particular contribution is an amalgamation of over 100 years of experience that we have on the dais over here, all we can say is that the most important takeaway, we all wanted to protect the environment, but the question is, how are we going to do? And the dichotomy that we need to focus on is the balance that we wanted to bring between development and conservation on one hand, and most importantly, the other element is philosophizing this particular balance through understanding what is the meaning of altruism and what is the meaning of selfishness, and then perhaps we can ideate and then evolve with some solutions. Easier said than done, though. because for many of the worldly problems, solutions are not so easily available. But the way we have gathered here this morning perhaps is also one of the ways through which we can find solutions through discussions and more awareness and greater enforcement, so that there is a contribution from one and all, as Justice Rajkumar mentioned in his inaugural address, which covered a variety of areas, both in structural terms and even morally, and even taking cue from the Constitution. And so is the case even with our judges from abroad, from the United States, who brought in their experiences, and also that shows that environment is a common good and a public good, and that sort of transcends the frontiers. So it's been a pleasure, a delight, and we only hope that given the kind of a program we have during the day, it's going to be both substantive and productive. And most importantly, what makes this conference all the more significant is the heterogeneous conglomeration of people we have in this auditorium, lawyers, conservationists, activists, writers, journalists, and students in particular, because they are the change agents who are going to take all these debates and discussions and discourses ahead.